Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, Webhooks, Don't Call Me, I'll Call You. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Richard Saunders. I'm the Contensis Product owner and I help set the direction of the Contensis product alongside Cy, the Chief Product Officer. So let's get started. Today, I want to start off with giving a bit of an overview of some architectural changes that we've made to support the features that we're going to outline today. And the first thing that I want to touch on is this new event service. For those of you who've been with Zengenti for a while and using Contensis for a while, we've been updating and expanding the product, recent redesign in Contensis 14. And we've been splitting up the architecture of the application into a more microservices architecture. And behind the scenes now, we've got this new event service that allows us to understand activity going on in Contensis. So this service exists to simply understand all the different ins and outs that are going on in the product. So it's all based on the RabbitMQ messaging service. You would have heard us talk about this in the past, and it's one of the main kind of system components that sits behind the scenes to let different systems know that different things are happening and that messages are being sent. So for example, every time you publish an entry, that entry gets synced to Elastic and it gets told this through the Rabbit service. Effectively, the event service manages messages. So when an action takes place in the product on a particular resource, like an entry, a message is sent to say that something has happened to that entry. An entry has been created or updated or published or deleted. This goes for many of the resource types that we have in the product: users and groups, nodes, when something's created in the site view tree or moved or updated. These all trigger a message to be sent to that event service to say something has happened, a change has been made. And there's thousands of these events that can occur on a daily basis. Fundamentally, the event service is the kind of foundational part that enables our product, Contensis, your site, or application to react to this Contensis activity. And two of the consumers of that service, two features that will utilize that service are webhooks and server sent events, or SSE. And those are going to be our focus today. So let's start with webhooks. Aptly named, Don't Call Me, I'll Call You. This is all down to the underlying principles of how you would communicate with systems outside of Contensis today when you want to get Contensis content into an application, a third-party integration or application. As I said earlier, webhooks are effectively automated messages that can be sent to another system when an action on a resource happens. Today, what you would do is, if you wanted to find out if content in Contensis has changed or whether there's new entries, an API would make a series of calls on a sort of scheduled basis or on a polling basis and say, have you got any updates? Have you got any updates? Have you got any updates? And eventually the API might come back and say, yeah, there's a new entry of this type. You've created a new book, you've created a new page type, and that's available. And that's kind of okay. That's kind of a common methodology to check if there's new content available. But you miss out on, depending on your polling interval. So if you're saying, I want to check if there's any new content every 10 minutes, you won't know if there's new content came in at minute 8 or minute 5. So it's kind of like it's reactive. It's not really reacting to the content as it's happening. It's just sort of checking on a scheduled basis. Whereas with webhooks, when an action occurs on a piece of content, a webhook can be fired, a notification can be sent, and then the API can respond to the fact that a change has occurred. So it makes it much more simple. You're not kind of constantly polling Contensis with our APIs to say, if you've got anything new, we just tell you when that happens. So if you create an entry, that webhook can fire, API can go and request that freshly created entry for you to do something with, or if the entry is published, the same process, you can be notified and make a call if you need any more information about that particular entry. So that's all well and good. We've got this event service that sends messages when something happens or can trigger a webhook to send this notification. But how and why would you use it? Well, one integration point might be you want to notify Slack or Microsoft Teams with a message. You might want to set up a group or a channel in these platforms and say, do you know what, when any content of this type gets created or moved into a particular workflow state, just let me know about it and let my team know about it. So if you're a small team working on a group of particular content, you could be notified by that. You may want to keep different systems synchronized together. You might create products in Contensis to display on your website, but you might be pushing it also into an e-commerce platform. And so as you update the product in Contensis, you could push that over to your e-commerce platform. Or you could be taking orders through your site, buying tickets. We've done a few ticket integrations recently, and you might want to push it back into your back office system to execute another process. So you can keep data in sync between multiple systems using webhooks. Alternatively, you might use something more common like creating a contact form and saying, yes, I'm a user that wants to be notified about different marketing information or give me updates on this particular topic. So you could take that kind of customer request as an entry, and when that entry is created, it can be pushed over to something like MailChimp. Or alternatively, you might be looking to add leads into a CRM or into a CRM process like Salesforce or HubSpot. So an interaction takes place on your website, a form is submitted, a piece of content is created, and fires a webhook over to these systems. Or you can be developing an application and using something like GitLab or Circle CI and want to kick off a pipeline build of that application. You might be running tests on your kind of development of a piece of application or software that you want to kind of be notified when a change is happened, so you can rebuild your site, static site or app's content to it. You might use a system like Trello or Jira to manage tasks in your organization. And actually, it might be quite important to see a list of content that you need to kind of review at a specific date and time, which could fire a webhook and say, I'll create a ticket, this content needs reviewing, so you can manage it in a Kanban board or similar. Or you could do something like flashing a light in your office when an order is placed, or content that's been downloaded by using something like Philips Hue or an IFTTT integration with these kind of services. All possible to trigger these things using webhooks. So what types of things can trigger a webhook? What types of event are there? Well, up until today, that we've got running at the moment, you can create, update, delete, publish, unpublish entries, and we can fire webhooks on that information, on assets, creation, updating or deleting content types or components, and as I mentioned earlier, node changes in the site view tree. We also have got support for users, groups, and project changes that go on. I think it's worth saying now that webhooks are project-based in the system. So here we only know about project updates, not necessarily that another project has been created or another project has been deleted. So Basically, a piece of content gets updated, a resource gets updated, and an event is fired. You get a message. That message we call a payload, and it contains some level of understanding to what you're going to use in an integration. So here's the webhook screen. We will go into a demo shortly. But here we've got a payload that says, when an entry is updated, send this information off with the webhook. And we've made templates, and the payloads of these templates really kind of flexible. So often in webhooks, you just get some very basic information, maybe the ID of the piece of content that's been updated, the date, the time, the subscription name. And often you would get that information and then with an API go back and say, go and get me this other information about the book. You've told me that it's, I don't know, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but you haven't told me how many pages are in the book or how many, what's its ISBN number and things. So usually the content that's displayed is quite limited. So what we've done is we've created these default templates with a bit more richness to them. And we're actually using the liquid templating syntax here. So we can do other things. We can pass that data into filters, like in here, we've got this date time field is being passed into a particular date and time format. And you can also do conditional statements and things. So we've got this default template, and we've got default templates for each resource type. So you'll have different information being returned for a user update, an entry update, a transition or workflow state change on an entry. But you can also provide your own template and your own structure. And this makes it really powerful because you can send a message directly to Slack, for example, and really structure how that content is returned to those services. So you can provide more information without needing to use that API to go and get more data as a second action. We can just send it in one go. Here it is in kind of full screen, so you can kind of edit these when they start to get quite complex. This is using Slack's block kit syntax. So in Slack, for example, you can have messages that are customized and look a particular way, and you can follow, you can use this block kit builder, for example, in Slack's interface to say, I want this kind of text field, this section that's marked down. I want to put a dividing line on the screen. I then want to kind of break these things down and put some images in there with the review dates. So it's kind of really flexible in what you can do, particularly with Slack. I know Teams has got a similar structure and layout. So it comes back to the fact that these payloads that you can send can be structured in a way that you want and send over the data that's necessary to your integration. And as I highlighted earlier, it uses the liquid syntax. If you've used Shopify previously or static site generators like Jekyll or Hugo, you may be familiar with this syntax. And there's a really good kind of guide that Shopify's put together with all the kind of common templating syntax for you to follow. So that's all well and good about constructing these from scratch and defining these in webhooks, but we've actually created some out-of-the-box integrations for you. It's kind of limited at the moment because I want to ask you a question today. We've got some Slack and some GitHub and a Trello integration in the system, but we can extend these and add these very easily in the background. Basically, any system that has a REST interface or an incoming webhooks option within their application, we can connect to. So I suppose there's a question for yourselves here today that we maybe look for some answers in the chat is, are there any out-of-the-box templates you like to see? Are there systems that you're aware of that you want to get content from Contensis into that you may be able to use this avenue of webhooks to get that content into? So if you've got any ideas, please put them in the chat, and we can chat through some of those and hopefully draw in some of those before the release. So that's great. We've got these webhooks that fire, we get these custom messages sent, and they get received hopefully by the integration, the system that's going to receive these messages. But you know what, sometimes when you might be dealing with transactional data and these webhooks are being fired consistently, and you've got, as I've mentioned, you've got thousands of pieces of activity potentially going on in the system on a daily basis, there will be times where your integration may not get the message, or that they may not respond to the message appropriately. And so we need to provide you an interface within webhooks for you to understand that, for you to troubleshoot any activity. So we're going to introduce activity logs. So once you've gone into a webhook and that webhook's been running for some time, you can then begin to look at its activity, see which webhooks have taken place, what time that they were fired, whether they were successful or not. If they haven't been successful, we will retry those webhooks for up to 10 times. So we've got an exponential back-off strategy, which sounds very kind of complex, but it's basically a retry policy that says, right, try after maybe a minute, after 3 minutes, after 10 minutes, and it will keep on retrying until it meets the 10 retries. At that point, we won't send any more messages to that integration. There's obviously a problem with the integration at the other end in why that content can't be received. And so if that occurs, you're probably going to want to filter down to these particular issues. So we'll be able to filter these errors down, and then you'll be able to dig in to the detail. What was the message that was sent? What was the response from the server? And these may be a sequence of 10 items, so we'd be able to kind of cycle through each of these core details so you can get an understanding of what's wrong at your integration end. So if you've got an import into another system and your importer's not responding, hopefully you'll be able to use this kind of activity log to identify where your problem exists and hopefully rectify it as well. So that's all well and good talking about it. Let's go and see it in action. So I'll just come out, Keynote, and open up my browser. So here we are. We've got a Contensis instance here. As I mentioned, webhooks are now found under the project settings for the project of the website or application use that you're using. So head over to project settings in the side toolbar, and then you've got webhooks. And here you'll see we've got 2 webhooks available. I will go into these in detail, but I just want to kind of take you through the new webhook process. So you can create a webhook, you can create one from fresh, from scratch, or you can choose an existing item. So if you were to choose the Slack item, we'll start to provide you a kind of step-by-step wizard or a set of fields to populate with the information that those services require. So Slack, you just need their incoming webhooks URL. For example, Trello gets a little bit more complex because we need to call their REST API. So you might need to specify the content ID of the content that you're interested in sending. You'll need to give it an API key, a server token. What list do you want to create a card in Trello? So what's its list? Do you want the card in Trello to appear at the bottom of the list or the top of the list? So these are some options that I've created, and that will pre-populate. If I just make this up for a minute, if I say book, I make this API key up, server token. I haven't set up this demo today, but you'll get the gist of what gets created when we create the webhook. So go into this webhook. So you can see that through that pre-formatted template, it started to populate the Trello URL that is expected by Trello's REST service. So it's put the API key in and the token into the REST call. Here I said that I wanted the content type of book, so it's automatically selected the book topic, the sort of event that will get fired. And here you can see a custom payload that's been created that's wanting to push that content into the list with the ID of 1, 2, 3, 4, position at the top, with some text for the title of the Trello card, review entry. And here we're using that liquid syntax I mentioned earlier that says, go and get the entry, the resource. If this was a group or user, it says, go and get the user and in output the entry title. And please could you review the following entry? And then you can put in the edit URL, put in the entry ID, and that would create an edit link to go back from that Trello card back into Trello, back into edit the entry. So that's that's creating one from a template. But let's go in and look at it in a little bit more detail at this Slack notification, which I want to kind of demo to you today. So the content that I've got in my system is all books, and I've got a library team that need to be informed when a new book has been created or a new book has been updated. So here I'm using Slack's incoming webhooks URL, and you basically go to your Slack workspace settings or your Microsoft Teams workspace settings, and you will often have the option of create an app, type of incoming webhooks. And when you do it, you give it a name. It says what channel do you want to connect to, and then they'll give you this URL. So you can copy and paste that URL into the webhook URL box. And here are the topics or the events that will basically cause this webhook to be created or fired. So I'm saying in the actions of an entry, when an entry is created or updated, do something. When it's a book content type or a character content type, so in this example, I don't need character, I'm just interested in books. So when a book is updated or created, fire the webhook. And here's that custom message that is being created using the block kit syntax that Slack has. So over here in Slack, here's that block kit builder. So you can choose different kind of previews to get you started. So if I do message preview, I can remove these blocks and it'll show me the syntax. So I've got a description at the top, I've got a couple of dividers, I don't need both of those dividers. I've got a series of buttons that are specified down the bottom. And what you can basically do is you can copy and paste this payload, and you can push it into this screen and paste it here. And from here, going to full screen, you can see here I've got these liquid variables again. So I'm saying, get me the entry title. What was the event that occurred? So that would be things like I've been created, I've been updated. Give me some other information in my Slack message. I want to know what content type it was. So resource.sys.content type ID. So it's going back to the entry. And if you were to get the entry JSON, you'd have a sys object that has content type ID. Get me the date and time that it was last updated, who was it modified by, and what's its entry ID. And then here I've constructed an edit URL. So when it gets sent over to Slack, there'll be a button on there that says edit entry that I can come back to edit that entry that's been updated. So it makes it really easy for the person being notified to go and just go and edit that particular file, that entry. So that's as simple as that. It's basically has a name, a description, a URL, what event should fire it. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a whole ton of different kind of events that can be fired. So if I was interested in a content type, so say I had a product and I had an e-commerce platform with a product, and I wanted to understand or inform that other integration, oh, by the way, I've changed the way the product is now constructed, and I could inform that integration at the other end that something has happened, something's been updated with a particular content type. So let's so that's the webhook itself. That's how it's constructed. So let's go and see it over in real life. So let me just switch screens to here. So now that webhooks URL that I entered relates to this library team content channel in Slack. And here's my entry listing in the same CMS. And if I go to edit a book, those of you who've seen my webinars before know I always use Roald Dahl books. But if I open up ECO Trot, I'm on the VPN, so 2 seconds, here it is. So if I change ECO Trot to a hardback and I make a change, remember my webhook topic said when a book is created or updated, fire that webhook. So if I hit save now, that change will be saved, and you should see, here it is, popped up in Slack here on the right-hand side now, the message that has been sent from the webhook with that custom payload and all the data populated. So I've got the entry with a URL going back to it. There's a link. The entry description, actually, if we look at my content type, you might think, why is that the entry description? Because I've set the ISBN number to be the entry description. So ISBN 13 is the description that gets output. And then it recognizes that it's the book content type. It was updated by me, the Zengenti user, at this date and time. And here's the entry ID. And then because we put the link back in, we can just go back to that entry, and maybe an approver or somebody who's working on that content can go in, edit, and check it. Obviously, that's great for just updates, but what if I wanted to understand of a workflow change? Well, I can do that too. Just go to, in fact, I just go back over to the builder. I can change the topic to say when a workflow transition takes place. Now, with the book content type, I haven't got workflow set up on it, but if I choose a person, I want to say that if an author or person in my scenario transitions to the awaiting approval state, so an approver needs to approve that content before it's published, I can actually transition, I can fire a webhook on that particular type of event. So that's quite helpful. So that's how you would do that scenario. So by changing the workflow state when any of my content in the person content type goes to awaiting approval, that webhook could be fired and you could update that message in there as well. I'm going to take this one off. If everyone can look at Sai's face, he's kind of got the landing behind him. I mentioned earlier that there was a webhook set up for, if we go back up into webhooks, I've got another webhook here called IFTTT, if this then that. It's a web service that can take an incoming webhook or all kinds of different inputs from different web applications and result in another action taking place from their system. So Sai's got this set up to blink a light on his landing when an entry is published. So I can publish a book or a person. So let's go to William Shakespeare. Make a change to this. Take that space out. Hit save. I'll send it for approval. Should have just chosen a book. Hit save. And then if I approve that now, if you check out Sai's background, hopefully in a second you'll start to see his lights begin to flash. So his light is flashing on his landing from that entry being published and going off to if this then that. So quite a kind of a trivial approach, but it might be quite helpful for different scenarios. I know in the past in our office, when people used to download copies of Contensis, we used to flash the bulb in the office to kind of say there's another download. or I work with a local kind of coffee firm, and we've set up a Shopify webhook that flashes and rings a bell in their kind of warehouse when a new order's been placed. So you can kind of use it for trivial things, or you can celebrate it. And if you look online, you've got people doing it with smoke machines and all sorts of fun things. So it don't always have to be serious. So that's a little demo of webhooks. We're still working on activity at the moment that we need to finish off before release. But that'll give you a sense of how we can connect webhooks and Contensis content together. So if you give me 2 seconds to go back into Keynote, and we'll just summarize that piece. So essentially, webhooks allow easy integrations into lots of different systems, and we've provided some out-of-the-box templates, and hopefully from today's discussion we can draw more of those in. They can be triggered under a number of different conditions: entries changing, nodes changing, users changing, assets changing. You can customize the payload or the content that is sent to the third-party integration. So it's got a really flexible output, and you'll be able to understand the activity of those webhooks and the call details relating to them, to validate if something's going wrong or whether it's been successfully received. So that's webhooks, and that brings us on to server-sent events. So server-sent events takes a slightly different approach to webhooks. Webhooks is about kind of saying, given a set of conditions, fire this message, send this message that something has happened. With server-sent events, you basically got a browser or an application that can basically subscribe to a stream of events generated by the server. So they can constantly receive updates when new events occur. So if changes are going on in Contensis and you've got your website, you could get your website or an application to constantly get a stream of updates from Contensis itself. So again, this avoids the traditional polling. Have you got any updates? Have you got any updates? Have you got any updates? Oh, not yet. Oh, yeah, here I got one. It saves that process. So server-sent events uses something called event source, the event source interface. It creates a HTTP connection using the event stream content type to create a constant connection to the server, and then the server will constantly send events as they occur to the system. So you can constantly consume that list of updates and they're streamed to the client. One of the great things is it's a HTML5 web standard, and it's supported by all major browsers. So you can use this stuff today. It's really well documented, and if you do need to support clients like IE11, you can use a polyfill to continue using that data and getting that data even in those browsers. So why would you use it? How could you use it? Well, we've all been quite familiar with the BBC homepage probably recently, in recent months, keeping up to date on all the different things that are going on. And if you've watched any of the live streams around COVID or around the presidential elections, you usually see this red bubble that appears on the BBC News to say there's an incoming update. Well, this kind of live news reporting or live updates could come from using server-sent events and keeping kind of abreast of news and getting live updates. We've had quite a lot of rain recently, and you could use server-sent events to keep up to date with data, live sensor data, something like river levels, to keep on pumping those updates to your website, or even as something as difficult as it has been recently, COVID updates could all be, COVID dashboards, that type of stuff could all be populated through server-sent events. So there's lots of ways. Basically anything that needs real-time updates can be served by server-sent events. So that's some of the ways you can use it. So fundamentally, we've produced a new event service, a new events microservice that 2 applications are using, Webhooks and Server Sent Events. And it's a kind of it's a foundation for us to build on further and deliver more features to you in coming releases. One of these is email notifications. I know people have been asking for a while, but with this event service in the background now, we have complete understanding of what's going on with every type of resource in Contensis, and we can react to that in different ways. So we can introduce email notifications. We can introduce the idea of, I'm a user, I don't just want to be told about lots of different things. I can choose what I subscribe to and what I don't subscribe to in email notifications, something that you can't really do previously. It allows us to bring push notifications to the application itself, so getting more of an inbox task generated, ideas of like, so you're working on content with others, somebody leaves a comment on an entry, pushing those kind of things into an inbox tray within Contensis itself, so containing your workflow and management of content all in one place. And without the event service, this will become really difficult to achieve, and now we can just layer on top of it. We're really keen to introduce collaboration. We've worked on a WebSockets version previously, and we hope to bring that to Contensis again soon. It's just that we've been waiting for these underlying pieces to support that. And we can support a more reactive user interface. For example, in site view today, to understand if a node has changed or content has changed, we do a lot of refreshing every time you click on things, which sometimes makes the interface feel a bit slow or sluggish, and we can make those updates live, like entries listing screens as content updates. We can make those a bit more reactive to the changes that are going on, and making it more feeling like you're not the only person within the application. So it's really exciting of what we can do on top of that, while still releasing 2 major features to you in the coming weeks. We've also worked on users and group and organization management in the new interface. So you can now head over to organization settings, and you'll be able to manage users and groups. So the users listing can be managed there, and things like creating new users in sequence, creating multiple users one after another is much simpler. The same with groups and group management, and being able to get an understanding of who's in which group using a fresher, more modern interface that you're used to since using Contensis 14. So that's what's coming. Keep an eye out on the what's new for changes. If you haven't been keeping an eye out on the kind of updates that have been coming out, we regularly update the UI now across the cloud platform. Keep an eye on the what's new to see what's been changing. And if you've got any questions, not just from this webinar, but generally, find us on Slack and join the Slack community. We'd love to kind of chat with you.